Tar Baby, Cassette 4.
The skin of the baby's seals sucked up the dampness of her own. Jadine closed her eyes and imagined the blackness she was sinking into. She lay spread-eagle on the fur, nestling herself into it. It made her tremble. She opened her lips and licked the fur. It made her tremble more. Undine was right. There was something a little fearful about the coat. No, not fearful. Seductive. After a few more moments of nestling, she got up and made preparations to take another shower and to get dressed. The clock showed 12:30, and she still had to phone Solange, answer letters, and see about Margaret. She would need soothing. Maybe they would take their fruit and cold consommé down by the fish pond, or farther up the hill to the gazebo. Because of Margaret's refusal to leave her bedroom, they had already missed their session of exercise and muscle-tightening calisthenics. Valerian would be in the greenhouse through lunch, where he usually had a baked potato or some other single item. Only Undine and Sidney ate a substantial lunch. Both had 3 very full meals a day, and their menu was in no way related to what was served at Valerian's table. Jadine came out of the shower as moist as she was when she went in, so she dressed as slowly as possible in order to prevent more perspiration. The emperor butterflies were back now, agitating the air. Jadine watched them languidly as she brushed her hair and bound it into a knot at the top of her head. Then she pulled a few strands over her ears and temples to soften the look. On impulse, she put on her coat again, and she was looking in a full-length mirror, judging the effect, when the smell hit her. She moved a little to her left to see what the mirror reflected behind her. There he stood in mauve silk pajamas, his skin as dark as a riverbed, his eyes as steady and clear as a thief's. "Morning," he said, and smiled, bringing once more into view the small, dark dogs galloping on silver feet. Jadine could not find her tongue. She was staring into the mirror at his hair. Last night, sitting with Valerian in the soft light of the dining room, it had looked merely long and unkempt. Here, alone in her bedroom, where there were no shadows, only glimmering, unrelieved sunlight, his hair looked overpowering, physically overpowering, like bundles of long whips or lashes that could grab her and beat her to jelly, and would. Wild, aggressive, vicious hair that needed to be put in jail. Uncivilized reform school hair. Mau Mau, Attica, chain gang hair. "Good morning," he said it again. She struggled to pull herself away from his image in the mirror and to yank her tongue from the roof of her mouth. She was sober now, and the thought that she had not grasped fully the night before, the picture that only Margaret had seen clearly, was framed for her now in the fruitwood of the mirror. This man had been living among them in their things for days, and they had not known it. What had he seen or heard? What was he doing there? "Hey, I was saying good morning to you." She turned, freed at last from the image in the mirror. "You could have knocked, you know." The door was open. He gestured to the door behind him. "But it's still a door, and can be knocked on." He seemed to close his eyes to her without shutting the lids, and what was left of his smile disappeared into his beard and the riverbed darkness of his face. "This is wrong," she thought. "I shouldn't make him angry. I'm sorry, but you startled me. Did you sleep well?" He nodded, but didn't return the smile she dredged up to her own lips. "The shower doesn't work," he said, glancing around the room. "Oh," she laughed, and to hide her confusion, shed her sealskin coat, throwing it on the bed. "There's no handle. Just push the knob in the center. It'll come on. It took me a while, too, at first." He looked past her to the sealskin coat sprawled on the bed. Jadine flushed as though he could see the print of her nipples and thighs on the pelts. He walked toward the coat and the bed. The pajamas they'd given him were too small. The sleeves ended somewhere between wrist and elbow, and the pants leg came to just above his shins. As he stood looking at the coat, she couldn't tell whether he or it was the blacker or the shinier, but she knew she did not want him to touch it. "I'll get Sidney to get some clothes for you if you like." Then, thinking of Sidney's response to that chore, she added, "Or Yardman can get some things for you." "Who?" He turned away from the coat. "Yardman, the gardener." "That his name?" "No." She smiled, searching for the leashes of the small, dark dogs. "But he answers to it, which is something, at least. Some people don't have a name of any kind." He smiled, too, moving away from the bed toward her. "What do you like? Billy? Paul? What about Rastus?" "Don't be funny. What is your name?" "What's yours?" "Jade." He shook his head as though he knew better. "Okay, Jadine Childs." She reached for a cigarette. "Can I have one of those?" "Sure." She gestured toward the escritoire for him to help himself. He pulled out a Gauloise filter, lit it, and began to cough. "Been a long time," he said, and for the first time looked vulnerable. Jadine grabbed the leashes. "Keep the pack," she said. "There's plenty more if you want them." He nodded and took another drag with a little more success. "Who's the Copper Venus?" he asked her. Jadine dropped the leashes. "Where did you see that?" "I didn't see it. I heard it." "Where?" She could not find them. They were gone. "The woman who comes to work here. She talks to herself out in the wash house." Now she had them again, safely back in her fingers. "Mary! It must have been Mary." Jadine laughed. "That was a publicity thing. When I was modeling, they called me that. I wonder how Mary knows about it. I don't think she can even read." "You were a model?" He narrowed his eyes with interest. Jadine walked over to a large straw chest. As she left the Karastan, her gold-thread slippers clicked on the tile. After rummaging a while, she pulled out a fashion magazine with her face on the cover. When she handed it to him, he sat down at the desk and made a flute sound between his teeth, and then another as his eyes traveled from the crown of her head to the 6 centimeters of cleavage supported, more or less, by silver lame. Her hair in the picture was pressed flat on her head, pulled away from her brow, revealing a neat hairline. Her eyes were the color of mink, and her lips wet and open. He continued the flute sounds, and then opened the magazine. After flipping the pages for a few seconds, he came to a 4-page spread of her, in other poses, other clothes, other hair, but always the same wet and open lips. "God damn," he whispered. "God damn." Jadine said nothing, but she held on tight to the leashes. The look on his face made her smile. He examined the pictures closely, whispering "shit" and "God damn" softly to himself at intervals. "What does it say?" He put the magazine flat on the desk, turned at an angle so she could read and translate the text. "Oh, that's just stuff about me." She leaned on the edge of the desk facing him and the magazine. "Where I went to school, things like that." "Read it to me." Jadine leaned over and translated rapidly the important parts of the copy. "Mademoiselle Childs, graduate of the Sorbonne, an accomplished student of art history, a degree in, is an expert on Croissonnet, having visited and worked with the master Nape, an American now living in Paris and Rome, where she had a small but brilliantly executed role in a film by..." She stopped. The man was tracing her blouse with his forefinger. "This," he said, lifting his finger from the picture to point at the caption beneath. "What does this say?" "That's just a description of the dress. Natural, raw silk, honey-colored. Right here it says fast lane. What's that about?" "Oh, they're trying to be hip. It says if you travel as Jade does in what the Americans call the fast lane, you need elegant but easy-to-pack frocks. Then it goes on about the jewelry. What about the jewelry? Now he traced the heaps of gold necklaces above the honey-colored silk. The total worth of it is, she calculated quickly from francs into dollars, $32,000. 32,000? Uh-huh. Shit. And the earrings? Did they talk about the earrings? He was looking at a facing close-up of her, from the nose down to the first swelling of her breasts, which featured earrings, a sculptured piece around her throat, and again the wet and open lips. Lovely, aren't they? Antiques. They belong to Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great? A queen, huh? Empress. The Empress of all the Russias. She gave them to you? Stupid! She's been dead for almost 200 years. Oh, yeah? Yeah. She drew out the word and made it as flat and American as she could, but she was smiling at the same time. They must be worth a lot, then. Quite a lot. Priceless. Nothing's priceless. Everything has a price. He was tracing again, circling Catherine's earrings with his forefinger. Jadine felt her earlobes prickle as she watched him. Well, 500,000, certainly. 500,000? Shit. Don't you have any other word to express awe? She tilted her head and fastened her big, minky eyes on him. He nodded. Goddamn. She laughed then, and for the first time there was no tension in it at all. He merely smiled and continued fingering the photograph. Are these your clothes, or did they just let you use them for the pictures? They're mine. Some were given to me after I was photographed, a kind of payment. And the jewelry. They give you that, too? No. That was mine from before, except the earrings. They were on loan from the Russians, but the rest is part of my own collection. Collection, huh? Why? Are you a thief? I wish I was. Be a lot easier for me if I could steal. If? What do you call what you were doing in this house for days? Or were you planning to give Ondine back her chocolate? You call that stealing? You don't? He shook his head. No. I call it eating. If I wanted to steal, I had plenty of time and plenty of opportunities. But no way to escape with what you took. So maybe there was no point in stealing. Then. You think there's a point in my stealing now? There might be. It depends on what you want from us. Us. You call yourself us? Of course I live here. But you're not a member of the family. I mean, you don't belong to anybody here, do you? I belong to me, but I live here. I work for Margaret Street. She and Valerian are my patrons. Do you know what that means? They take care of you, feed you and all. They educated me, paid for my travel, my lodgings, my clothes, my schools. My mother died when I was 12. My father when I was 2. I'm an orphan. Sidney and Ondine are all the family I have, and Valerian did what nobody else even offered to do. The man was silent, still staring at the pictures. Jadine examined his profile and made sure the leather was knotted tightly around her wrists. Why don't you look at me? She asked him. I can't, he said. Why can't you? The pictures are easier. They don't move. Jadine felt a flash of pity. You want me to be still? Will you look at me if I'm still? He didn't answer. Look, she said. I'm still. Very still. He lifted his head and looked at her. Her eyes were mink-colored, just like in the pictures. And her lips were like the pictures, too. Not moist, but open a little, the way they were in sleep. The way they were when he used to slip into her room and wait hours, hardly breathing himself, for the pre-dawn light to bring her face out of the shadows and show him her sleeping mouth. and he had thought hard during those times in order to manipulate her dreams, to insert his own dreams into her, so she would not wake or stir or turn on her stomach, but would lie still and dream steadily the dreams he wanted her to have, about yellow houses with white doors, which women opened and shouted, "Come on in, you honey, you," and the fat black ladies in white dresses minding the pie table in the basement of the church, and white, wet sheets flapping on a line, and the sound of a 6-string guitar plucked after supper while children scooped walnuts up off the ground and handed them to her. Oh, he thought hard, very hard during those times to press his dreams of ice houses into hers, and to keep her still and dreaming steadily, so that when she woke finally, she would long, as she had longed for nothing in her life, for the sound of a nickelodeon. But after a while, he began to smell like an animal in that room with her, and he was afraid his smell would waken her before the sun did, and before he could adjust his breath to hers and breathe into her open mouth his final dream of the men in magenta slacks who stood on corners under sky-blue skies and sang "If I Didn't Care" like the ink spots. And he fought hard against the animal smell, and fought hard to regulate his breathing to hers, but the animal smell got worse, and her breathing was too light and shallow for his own lungs. And the sun always eschewed a lingering dawn in that part of the world, and strutted into the room like a gladiator, so he barely had time to breathe into her the smell of tar and its shiny consistency before he crept away, hoping that she would break wind, or believe she had, so the animal smell would not alarm her or disturb the dream he had placed there. But now she was not sleeping. Now she was awake. And even though she was being still, he knew that at any moment she might talk back, or worse, press her dreams of gold and cloisonné and honey-colored silk into him, and then who would mind the pie table in the basement of the church? "How much?" he asked her. "Was it a lot?" His voice was quiet. "What are you talking about? How much what?" "Dick. That you had to suck. I mean, to get all that gold and be in the movies. Or was it pussy? I guess for models it's more pussy than cock." He wanted to go on and ask her was it true what the black whores always said, but she was hitting him in the face and on the top of his head with a badly formed fist and calling him an ignorant motherfucker with the accent on the syllable ig. Jadine jumped away from the desk and leaned forward trying to kill him with her fists, while her mind raced to places in the room where there might be a poker or a vase or a sharp pair of shears. He turned his head a little, but did not raise his arms to protect Elle. All he had to do was what he did, stand up, and let his height put his face and head out of her easy reach. She stretched, nonetheless, trying to tear the whites from his eyes. He caught both her wrists and crossed them in front of her face. She spit full in his face, but the saliva fell on the sea of his pajama top. Her gold-thread slippers were no good for kicking, but she kicked anyhow. He uncrossed her wrists and swung her around, holding her from behind in the vice of his arms. His chin was in her hair. Jadine closed her eyes and pressed her knees together. "You smell," she said. "You smell worse than anything I have ever smelled in my life." "Shh," he whispered in her hair, "before I throw you out the window." "Valerian will kill you, Abe. Sidney will chop you, slice you." "No, they won't." "You rape me and they'll feed you to the alligators. Count on it, nigger. You good as dead right now." "Rape? Why you little white girls always think somebody's trying to rape you?" "White!" She was startled out of fury. "I'm not... You know I'm not white." "No? Then why don't you settle down and stop acting like it?" "Oh, God," she moaned. "Oh, good God. I think you better throw me out the window, because as soon as you let me loose, I'm going to kill you. For that alone, just for that. For pulling that black woman, white woman shit on me. Never mind the rest. What you said before, that was nasty and mean. But if you think you can get away with telling me what a black woman is or ought to be, I can tell you." He nestled his cheek in her hair as she struggled in his arms. "You can't, you ugly barefoot baboon. Just because you're black, you think you can come in here and give me orders? Sidney was right. He should have shot you on the spot. But no, a white man thought you were a human being and should be treated like one. He's civilized and made the mistake of thinking you might be too. That's because he didn't smell you. But I did. And I know you're an animal because I smell you." He rubbed his chin in her hair and blew at the little strand over her ears. "I smell you too," he said, and pressed his loins as far as he could into the muted print of her Madeira skirt. "I smell you too." His voice was soft, breathy, and seemed to her to come from a great height. Someplace far, far up, higher than the ceiling, higher than the orchid trees even, and it frightened her. "Let me go," she said, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice, and even more surprised that he did it. She stood with her back to him, rubbing her wrists. "I'll have to tell Valerian." He didn't say anything, so she turned to face him and repeated, "I'll have to tell Valerian." He nodded. "Tell him," he said. "All of it, or part of it, whatever you like." "I will," she said, and started walking toward the door, clicking her gold thread slippers on the tile. "Except for one thing," he said. "Leave out one thing. Don't tell him that I smelled you." She walked out the door and down the hall. She meant to go to the downstairs powder room and clean him off her. But she didn't want to stop walking just yet, so she descended the staircase, crossed the front hall, and opened the door. The gravel of the driveway hurt her feet in the little gold thread slippers, but she went on, rubbing her wrists, feeling frightened and then angry, then frightened and angry again. When she got to the end of the drive, she stepped with relief onto the gravel-free macadam and continued until she came to a large stone by the side of the road. She sat down on it, under the eyes of an avocado tree, and lifted the hem of her skirt to wipe her face. She would tell Valerian to get rid of him that very afternoon. He would go, and that would be that. A minor episode in an otherwise uneventful winter in the Caribbean. Something to chat about at supper, to elaborate on with friends and laugh and say, "Can you believe it? He was in the house all that time? And when we found him, we invited him to dinner where he sat down and poured the coffee into his saucer and said hi to the butler." Ha ha! You should have seen Sidney's face. And Margaret was out of her mind, but Valerian was superb, as you might guess. You know Valerian, right? Totally unflappable. Totally. But I was about to wet my pants, right? And later... But no. She would not tell that part, although it was funny, especially about how he asked her, did Catherine the Great give her those earrings? He actually believed it, that they had belonged to the Empress. And how he kept fingering her pictures, but she couldn't tell about the question he asked her. How much did she have to suck? She would make it some other impudence, so she could get to the part about smashing his face and his trying to rape her. And maybe she could say that he was so dumb and country, he thought she was white, probably because she had a bath that morning and didn't have any hoops in her ears, and that he didn't want to rape her after all, but was content just to smell her. No, she'd leave out the smelling part. She wouldn't mention that part at all. Jadine felt the fear again, and another thing that wasn't fear, something more like shame. Because he was holding my wrists so tight and pressing himself into my behind. God, what a nasty motherfucker. Really nasty. Stink nasty. Maybe that was it. his smell. Other men had done worse to her and tried worse, but she was always able to talk about it and think about it with appropriate disgust and amusement, but not this. He had jangled something in her that was so repulsive, so awful. And he had managed to make her feel that the thing that repelled her was not in him, but in her. That was why she was ashamed. He was the one who smelled ripe, but she was the one he wanted to smell, like an animal, treating her like another animal, and both of them must have looked just like it in that room. One dog sniffing at the hindquarters of another, and the female, her back to him, not moving, but letting herself be sniffed, letting him nuzzle her asshole as the man had nuzzled hers, the bitch never minding that the male never looked in her face, or ran by her side, or that he had just come up out of nowhere, smelled her ass, and stuck his penis in, humping and jerking and grinding away, while she stood there actually bearing his whole weight as he pummeled around inside her, not even speaking or barking, his eyes sliced and his mouth open and dripping with saliva, and other dogs, too, waiting, circling until the engaged dog was through, and then they would mount her also in the street in broad daylight, no less. Not even under a tree or behind a bush, but right there on Morgan Street in Baltimore, with cars running by, and children playing, and the retired postman coming out of his house in his undershirt shouting, "Get that bitch out of here! She's in heat, lock that bitch up! Every goddamn dog in town will be over here." And he went back inside to get a mop handle to run the males off and crack the bitch over the back and send her home. She, who had done nothing but be in heat, which she couldn't help, but which was her own fault just the same. So it was she who was beaten and cracked over the head and spine with the mop handle and made to run away, and I felt sorry for her and went looking for her to see if she was hurt, and when I found her, she was behind the gas station, standing very quietly, while another dog sniffed her ass, embarrassing me in the sunlight. All around her, it was like that. A fast crack on the head, if you let the hunger show, so she decided then and there at the age of 12 in Baltimore never to be broken in the hands of any man, whatever it took. Knife blades or screaming teeth, never. And yes, she would tap dance, and yes, she would skate, but she would do it with a frown, pugnacious lips, and scary eyes, because never. And anybody who wanted nice from this little colored girl would have to get it with pliers and chloroform, because never. When her mother died and she went to Philadelphia and then away to school, she was so quick to learn, but no touchy, teacher, and no, I do not smile, because never. It smoothed out a little as she grew older. The pugnacious lips became a seductive pout, eyes more heated than scary. But beneath the easy manners was a claw always ready to rein in the dogs, because never. "Tell him," he said, "tell him anything. But don't tell him I smelled you, because then he would understand that there was something in you to smell, and that I smelled it. And if Valerian understands that, then he will understand everything. And even if he makes me go away, he will still know that there is something in you to be smelled, which I have discovered and smelled myself. And no sealskin coat or $1,000,000 earrings can disguise it." You son of a bitch, I need this like a wart. I came here to get some rest and have some peace and find out if I really wanted to kick my legs up on a runway and let buyers with Bianca breath lick my ears, or if I wanted to roam around Europe instead, following soccer games for the rest of my life and looking for another Batesy, or if I should buy an Alpha and drive through Rome, making the scene where producers and agents can see me and say, "Cara mia, is it really you? I have just the part." I came here to do some serious thinking. And the fact is that I can come here. I belong here. You, motherfucker, do not. And you, motherfucker, are leaving now as soon as I tell Valerian what you did to me. And the harbor police will be here and return you to the sharks where you belong. Damn Valerian. What does he think he's doing? Playing white people's games? Or what the hell is the matter with him? He sits there and complains about Margaret, practically breaks down thinking about his son, and talks about how he loves them both and has sacrificed everything for their happiness, and then watches her go crazy. She's so scared. And instead of protecting her, at least getting upset, he invites the very thing that scared the shit out of her to dinner, and lets him sleep down the hall from us all. Doesn't he know the difference between one black and another, or does he think we're all... Some mess this is. Jadine cupped her elbows in her palms and rocked back and forth on the stone, trying hard to pull herself together before she went back to talk to Valerian, to tell him he and his joke had gone too far and might backfire. She sat for a long time, longer than necessary, since she had already made up her mind. She started to stand several times, but each time something held her to the rock. Something very like embarrassment. Embarrassment at the possibility of overreacting, as she told her aunt and uncle they were doing. More awful than the fear of danger was the fear of looking foolish, of being excited when others were laid back, of being somehow manipulated, surprised, or shook. Sensitive people went into therapy and stayed there when they felt out of control. Was this really a funny story she could tell later, or was there real danger? But there was more. She felt a curious embarrassment in the picture of herself telling on a black man to a white man, and then watching those red-necked gendarmes zoom him away in a boat. But he was going to rape her. Maybe Margaret, too, or worse. She couldn't wait for Valerian to get bored or sober or come to his senses, and she couldn't risk hanging loose in this place where there was no one really to call on, where they were virtually alone. It would have to be done now, in the light of day. There was no betrayal in that. The nigger knew better, and if he didn't, he was crazy and needed to be hauled away. Besides that fear, and the fear of fear, there was another authentic loathing that she felt for the man. With him, she was in strange waters. She had not seen a black like him in 10 years, not since Morgan Street. After that, in the college she attended, the black men were either creeps or so rare and desirable they had every girl in the 150-mile radius at their feet. She was barely noticeable in, and never selected from, that stampede. Later, when she traveled, her society included blacks and whites in profusion, but the black people she knew wanted what she wanted. Either steadily or carefully, like Sidney and Undine, or uproariously and flashily, like theater or media types. But whatever their scam, making it was on their minds, and they played the game with house cards, each deck issued and dealt by the house. With white people, the rules were even simpler. She needed only to be stunning, and to convince them she was not as smart as they were. Say the obvious, ask stupid questions, laugh with abandon, look interested, and light up at any display of their humanity if they showed it. Most of it required only charm, occasionally panache. None of it called for this... Oh, horse shit, she said aloud. It couldn't be worth all this rumination, she thought, and stood up. The avocado tree standing by the side of the road heard her, and, having really seen a horse's shit, thought she had probably misused the word. Jadine dusted off the back of her skirt and turned toward the house. The avocado tree watched her go, then folded its leaves tightly over its fruit. When Jade got near the greenhouse, she thought she saw 2 figures behind the translucent panes. One was gesticulating wildly. Her heart pounding, she raced to the open door and peeped in, There they were, Valerian and the man, both laughing to beat the band. Chapter 5. Laughing? Margaret could not believe her ears. I'm telling you, they were there laughing. I was looking right at them when you called out the window. Good God! What's gotten into him? I don't know. Are you scared? Not really. Well, sort of. You don't know him, do you? Know him? How would I know him? I don't know. This is making me crazy. Maybe we should do something. What? We're the only women. And Undine... Should I go to the Broughtons and... Jadine stopped and sat down on Margaret's bed. She shook her head. This is too much. What did he say? Asked Margaret, when you all had dinner. Did he say what he was doing here? Oh, he said he was hiding. That he'd been looking for food after he'd jumped ship a few days ago. That he was trying to get something out of the kitchen and heard footsteps and ran up the stairs to hide. Apparently, he didn't know what room he went into. He was just waiting for a chance to get back out. Do you believe him? I believe some of it. I mean, I don't believe he came here to rape you. Me, maybe, she thought, but not you. How'd he get here? He says he swam. That's impossible. That's what he said. Well, then he can swim back. Now, today. I'm not going to sleep with him in this house. If I had known that, I would have had a heart attack. All night I waited for that bastard Valerian to come up here and tell me what the hell was going on. He never showed. And Sidney was patrolling the halls with a gun. I thought he would have killed him by now. What does he think? He's angry. Undine's scared, I think. I'm going to have it out with Valerian. He's doing this just to ruin Christmas for me. Michael's coming, and he knows I want everything right for him. And look what he does to get me upset. Instead of throwing that nigger. Right, nigger. Instead of throwing him right out of here. Maybe we're making something out of nothing. Jade, he was in my closet. He had my box of souvenirs in his lap. Open? No, not open. Just sitting there holding it. He must have picked them up from the floor. Oh, God, he scared the shit out of me. He looked like a gorilla. Jadine's neck prickled at the description. She had volunteered nigger, but not gorilla. We were all scared, Margaret, she said calmly. If he'd been white, we would still have been scared. I know. Look, Valerian let him in. Valerian has to get him out. I'm sure he will anyway, but you talk to him, and I will too. He'll be all right. You want to calm down. Let's do the breathing exercises. Cool out. I don't want to breathe. We have to do something. We can't leave it up to Valerian. Listen. Let's leave. Take the boat to town and fly to Miami. We won't come back till he's gone. Oh, but Michael. She touched her hair. I'll telephone him. He can meet us in Miami. And if Valerian's got his senses back... But it's the 22nd. There isn't time. What about Sidney and Undine? You don't think he'd go after Undine, do you? Well, we'll start. We'll look like we're going and tell Valerian why. We can call the police ourselves when we get to town. Is the boy here? Margaret asked. Yes, but... Jade, come on now. You've got to help. There's nobody else. Let's see if Valerian will send him away. You said they were in there laughing. Let's wait and see. Pack, just in case. I'll get reservations. All right, but I'm not going to leave this room until I know something definite. I'll bring you something to eat. Yes, and please hurry. I don't want to take a Valium on an empty stomach. They stayed in their rooms all afternoon, and the next time they saw the stranger, he was so beautiful they forgot all about their plans.
This ends side 1 of cassette 4. Please turn the cassette over and start side 2 at the same point.